Hey, financial team. I just wanted to send you guys this video because there's some exciting things happening in and around our Chi Alpha that I think you'll be interested in and have questions about. And so I wanted to just spend a few minutes to give you kind of a flyby view of some things coming down the road for us. I'm so grateful for your investment into my life, into our ministry, so that we can share the love of Christ on our campus, so that we can minister to a generation in a very strategic and key moment in their lives, where we can begin to see a generation raised up who are learning to be disciples who make disciples. And we do that because Jesus is worthy and he's worth it. And we do it in partnership with people like you. And so we're just grateful for the work that you guys do in our lives so that we can do the work through your generosity on our campuses. One thing that is coming up that is a little bit unique is we are looking to the future, and we have recently had just a lot of pioneering efforts. We've had since pioneering at CSU. If we include CSU, we've pioneered 8 ministries, and a ninth one is being sent out, already out the door, but is just getting ready to pioneer. And it's been awesome to just see as we've grown Chi Alpha around the state of Colorado. We've got 6 Chi Alphas here with teams and really working to make disciples who make disciples and share the love of Christ on their campuses. And it's not going to be today and it's not going to be next year, but in the near future, we could see a day where we have 100 graduates who are not just graduates of Chi Alpha, but graduates who were disciple makers on their campuses. And not just every 10 years, we're just talking every year seeing them go out. And yet, we don't in Chi Alpha do what we do so that students can have kind of a mountaintop season of learning how to share their faith with their friends just so that they can move on with their life after college. But we believe that these are convictions that should last for a lifetime. And we see that in a lot of our alumni. We have friends who went down to Denver. A number of alumni went together, and they went and just 3 of them bought houses in the same neighborhood, and they invited a bunch of friends to go move in with them, and they just began to reach out to their neighborhoods there in Denver. We have another group that headed up to Spokane, Washington recently, and kind of the ringleader for that group was just befriending people in the city park, and through playing volleyball began to just draw friendships around her life and began to minister the gospel. Saw a girl get saved very quickly, saw another one get right with Jesus very quickly. The church that they're connected with is looking at them and saying, what are you guys doing? Because we love it, but we don't think we understand it. And so often in leadership conversations with the church, the conversation is revolving around how do we make disciples well in the church? Jesus's command in Matthew 28, go and make disciples. But so often we are struggling to see the deep transformative work that we long for in our churches. Because we also see that oftentimes those convictions for disciples who make disciples is oftentimes lost outside of clergy or especially gifted people like super evangelist types. And so the average church member doesn't feel that deep responsibility to reach their neighborhood or to minister to their family effectively or to pray for that person at work when the opportunity arises. I was talking with one of our alumni recently, and she was talking with my wife just a little bit ago and sharing how after just being gone from Chi Alpha for a year, she's begun to lose those convictions for sharing the love of Christ with anybody outside of the walls of the church. And she's part of a great church. I was talking with one of our students who's going to graduate soon, and he was looking around at his church and telling me, Nate, this whole relational discipleship idea, this must be something for college because this obviously doesn't translate because nobody in my church is doing anything like this. And it's a good church, but they're not mobilizing. their people to be ministers of the gospel. And I would say when people ask, like, what is the purpose of Chi Alpha? I would say it's in part as an organization, if you will, as an entity, it's there to serve the body of Christ, to resource and equip and train and give platforms for celebration and challenge and charge to make disciples who make disciples. And yet so often that is lost after the college experience. And so something that we're wrestling with is like, hey, man, if we have 100 graduates every year who are disciple makers, what does it look like to mobilize them into transforming our neighborhoods, our cities, our society? Certainly we need it right now. And I long for the day when every person in my city is relationally tethered to somebody who's fighting for them, that atheist would know a Christian who loves them and who loves Jesus, that the prodigal would have somebody in their life that could walk with them back to the Father's house. And what would that look like to transform our society? Because our society is fighting the kingdom of God, is wrestling with the values of Christianity. And oftentimes, because there's nobody to walk with them through those questions or those challenges in their own life and their experiences. And so we are beginning this fall with the idea of a first step into that future idea of disciples who make disciples after college, of a church planting movement by ourselves planting a church. And so Lindsay and I feel like we need to kind of lead the way here as our Chi Alphas around the state and beyond begin to vision cast and dream about being a church planting movement. And certainly Lindsay and I have kind of seen that happen in our lives before, whether it's coming to Colorado and pioneering Colorado so that other people could pioneer in other places in Colorado, or whether it's going to Russia so others could come and take the mantle and take it further, or any other number of things that we have done. Whether or not we lead in this church plant for the foreseeable future or just a seasonal moment, I don't know. But we are feeling compelled to take that step in getting kind of our feet wet and to modeling what does it look like to make a church that's built on those ideas of authentic, life-giving relationships that are learning to pursue after Christ together and draw closer to Jesus as they're building community around their lives and taking responsibility for that community in their faith journeys. And so functionally, we're going to be taking the Chi Alpha team at CSU and starting a church alongside of it. It'll be something. It won't be Chi Alpha, but it'll be deeply married to the Chi Alpha. We're going to be starting with the idea of certainly a church of small groups, not a church just with small groups. Small groups being more than just a weekly meeting, although small groups should have a weekly meeting. They're not defined by that, but rather by that community of people that I have begun to gather together, that I've begun to pursue, that I've begun to fight for around in my life, for them to love Jesus and to walk with Jesus. And I'm taking responsibility for them. And as those small groups get together on Sundays, we're doing house churches. And we'll have 3 house churches this fall because we're going to be having a number of Chi Alpha students joining us with this as well. And so we'll have more people than a typical church plant probably would have, at least at first. And so we'll be having kind of 3 house churches with the idea of small group leaders coming together, bringing their people with them, and executing that Sunday experience in a kind of living room space is sometimes what we call it, just modeling an environment that encourages relaxed love relationship and an authentic community, but giving through a teaching team, proclaiming the word and worship, and once a month coming together on the campus at the University Center for a corporate service and message. And through that, our goal is to take those convictions of kingdom relationships, of that personal walk with God that's the glue for those kind of wings, and for responsibility for God's kingdom, and begin to model that not just on the university, but in front of the university with alumni and friends and professors, and to really model in our Chi Alpha community these convictions so that we can mobilize our generation of Chi Alpha students into church planting and church rejuvenation efforts. Now you might ask, like, well, what does this mean for you personally, Nate? Does this mean that you're becoming a pastor instead of doing Chi Alpha? And we say no. We see this not as something that we're adding to what we do, not something that is distracting from what we do, but something that is focusing the vision that we have for Chi Alpha by mobilizing this generation. I will be the pastor. Lindsay and I will be pastoring this church, and this is something that we just see as something needed for the future of Chi Alpha. Now, does that mean that we're going to be supported now through the church? And the answer is also no there. As U.S. missionaries, we have to be fully funded through the generosity of friends and churches and supporters that come alongside of us in this work. That Chi Alpha is a full-time job, and I'm still going to be working as the district director and the local director at CSU, and leading the internship program. And as we have a great team around us that are going to be executing all of this, we're looking forward to just kind of taking those steps of mobilizing this generation. But we can't do it without you. That we are going to be doing this work through the support, as we always have, of people like you. And that certainly gives us opportunity to go sometimes maybe a little bit slower in the breadth of our church plant. Oftentimes churches are trying to grow really a number of people into the church as quickly as possible so that they can fund and support the church. And while we'll have a lot of people loosely for a church plant because of the Chi Alpha, we don't anticipate that we'll have lots of large tithes. We certainly teach our students how to be generous, but generosity for college students is a little different, of course. And yet, we do anticipate with time, we are going to get to that place where the church will become more and more financially viable. We will be even fundraising a little bit for this church plant at the beginning, but ultimately it'll become more and more viable. And as it does, we anticipate that as it becomes self-sustaining and funding its needs and its growing needs, as we may be looking at facility needs and other things into the future, that we would also be heavily investing into missions efforts ourselves through the church. And that lastly, we would also be kind of creating maybe a war chest, if you will, for those church planting efforts into the future, that we would be able to send them out well into those church planting movements in the future. And so we just want to kind of share a little bit of the vision, the why, the how, kind of what we're doing. We're going to be starting this fall, and are excited just to see how we can begin to see a future where Chi Alpha is a ministry that's not just seeking to transform its campus, although that's certainly the focus of our day-to-day lives, but through transforming our campuses, that we are beginning to mobilize a generation into world missions, as we've seen in other parts that we've sent out in the world, and as Chi Alpha at large is continuing to advance. But that we would also see that 80% of our graduates who are eventually going to move into the marketplace in some context be mobilized as ministers of the gospel, whether as engineers or teachers or accountants or stay-at-home parents, that we would see a generation of disciples who are making disciples in the marketplace, as well as in missions and on the university, that we would see a generation raised up with the love of Christ in their hearts and the vision of the kingdom in their eyes, mobilized into missions work that would transform our world as a result, because he's worthy. Thanks, guys.